Yeah, what's good, y'all? Welcome to our session today. My name's Akun Dio, he, him. Um, I am Black Men Bill's Director of Political Education and Culture. And if you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome home. Uh, my church used to say that. But yeah, welcome to Theory Thursday. This is one of our flagship programs, our flagship political education program that we do once or twice a month. Where we get into a range of political conversation, a range of theoretical conversation. Sometimes it is focused on the moment. Sometimes it is focused on just building our muscle to for our own tools of analysis, to build our muscle around these ideas and to be in deep collective study around these ideas. And some of these ideas are not just ideas. Some of these really shape the material conditions of our lives, the way our lives function. And so the better we have an opportunity to understand what's going on in the current moment and its historical trajectory, the better we are to struggle against it. Today, we focus on unpacking repression. And as you all know, uh, since Trump was elected, repression has taken on a particular style in this country. Um, but with its progress and repression to African people, to indigenous people, to Palestinian people, um, repression, right? So we're going to get into that, but particularly in the U.S. context. Today, we're going to focus on more of the historical, like how do we get here? We'll spend some time theorizing what is repression and where it comes from and how it lands on us. And we will, and we'll spend some time also doing some group activity work. We like to use Theory Thursday as a space of learning, not just lecture, but really getting into a range of tools to understand. And also, this is a collective study. So we want to be able to share that wisdom and that knowledge with each other, right? So, we can get into it. So for today, we're gonna ground if you've been here before, then you know we start with our values and our definitions of power that we operate from. Then we'll get into what is repression. We'll get into some theory and analysis on the capitalist state as the big repressor. And then we'll get into some examples of the historical and contemporary modes of repression. And that's where you'll be in your work, you'll be workshopping with in your small groups to really unpack what is going on today. Um, and then, yeah, we'll close out. So starting with our pledge, actually, was somebody, hold on, Amadi, um, yeah, would somebody like to actually do the values pledge? So say the values pledge. So maybe raise your hand. Yeah, actually raise your hand. I'll call on you. When you raise your hand, use the function. Yes, there we go. Marquise. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
We are critical thinkers. We are curious about this moment. We are coming together to take an active, responsible role in freeing our communities. We are transforming to meet the moment. We are bonded with Black women and all Black people in the fight for true freedom. A caveat of Black people who choose to fight for the enemy or use our struggle for personal or financial benefit need not apply.
Thank you. Is it Marquise? Okay. Thank you.
Marcus,
Marcus. Excuse me.
you got it.
Thank you for the correction. Thank you, Marcus. Um, so grounding us in our definitions of power. Um, and we go with our dear ancestor Martin Luther King and our ancestor Dr. Huey P. Newton. Martin Luther King said, "Now, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change." Huey P. Newton. To use power is, first of all, the ability to define phenomenon, and secondly, the ability to make this phenomenon act in a desired manner. Yeah. So as we think about this, power is neutral. Power, their definition is not necessarily it is neutral, right? If you read that and you can hear your oppressor reading that. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change for the right? Is the ability to define phenomena. So the ability to say what is happening, to teach you and say what is happening, to control the narrative. That's what we're struggling for, and that is exactly what the enemy is doing as well, right? So we operate from this lens as we think about analyzing power, as we think about talking about the state, as we talk about capitalism, the oppression, repression, but also how we struggle against it. Yeah. Okay. Keep going. So today, our focus is to examine the issue of repression before us and offer analysis of how we got here. Again, this is what Black Men Build, myself, Maddie will offer, but not just us. This is always wisdom that's coming from a legacy of people in struggle, a legacy of philosophers, thinkers, doers. And then again, today we'll be spending time together, doing some collective learning. To assess the capitalist class's assess the capitalist class's uses, the, the capitalist class use of the state to engage in repression, right? And then lastly, we want to bring knowledge built on this session to talk about next week, right? So this is part one. We're using this as a foundation to talk about next week, which will be focused on how do we respond, right? How do we engage and struggle as it relates to repression, right? So this repression is happening, which is always happening, just has its ebbs and flows. What are the ways that we engage around this repression, right? What are the strategies and tactics to do so, right? And historically and contemporarily, right? Next. So, yeah, what is repression, right? We're talking about repression, but what actually is it? So maybe two people can come off or raise your hand and yeah, say what is repression, how you want to define it, and give it, I give you 30 seconds or so. You can give an example or you can kind of define it. But yeah, I would love for two people to drop some wisdom on us, drop some knowledge on us.
Can you hear me?
If you can raise your hand so I can see who's talking.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. I'll
Oh,
try to put my hand up, but
okay. Well, say your name, where you're from, and then yeah, go ahead and share.
yeah, my name is Roman. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm from Philadelphia. I live in Austin, Texas.
Hmm.
And to me, if I had to define repression, it's the censoring and invalidating of a people's ideas, their movement, both physical and like sociological, like political development, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Right on. Thank you. Um, we have Fred.
Hey, how's it going?
Peace.
I would say, in a similar manner to the Black Panther quote we just heard earlier, repression is power being used to um, hamper a weaker power. So the dynamic is constantly occurring, um, relieving morality out of it. It's like a power struggle, and one is going to use itself to stop another, and it could intersect with other things, other powers at the same time. But I think it's just power defeating other powers.
Indeed. I hear that. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So we'll offer a couple definitions here, right? We'll offer some here. So what is repression? Right? Repression is first and foremost the use of force or coercion by a ruling authority, right? And that a ruling authority in this day and age is a capitalist class. Um, but it is meant to suppress dissent, political opposition, and social movements that challenge the existing power structure, right? Um, Secondly, it's a tactic to maintain control and prevent revolutionary change, right? It is the state is protecting itself, right? It is looking to make sure it stays in existence to remain in power at all costs, right? Lastly, repression can manifest in various forms, including direct violence, mentioned censorship, right, and the restriction of civil liberties. Repression also, right, I want to be clear too, repression existed before capitalism, right? It's embedded in many ways the Western construct of civilization. Many can argue since the idea and the idea of civilization itself, with the any form of have and have nots, is a kind of a beginning phases of where repression will begin to show up in history, right? Um, One of the most popular examples, right, is Jesus as the revolutionary in the religious context, right? But not just that, but in the movement context, right? Where obviously Jesus was killed, right? But this was a response to the repression and the use of force, but also, right, not just the use of force, right? It was also co-optation, right? And so yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that yes, we're talking about it in the last, you know, last 100 years, but particularly repression has been around for a very, very long time, right? And so if you look at these definitions, you can actually apply it to any system. Um, so what we're gonna do next is start off with some pair shares, right? And we want to talk about this in a very local way, right? Starting off, right? We want to zoom in so we can zoom out to zoom back in again. So how is repression showing up where you live, right? So we're going to take about 4 minutes in pairs. So yeah, can I get maybe one or two to share back? Maybe what y'all talked about, and maybe share where you live and how repression is showing up where you live, so we can take about two people. And use the raise your hand function, please. Okay. We got Troy Wright.
Peace. Sorry for the white hand. I was in a group with Joy, and I cannot remember the brother's name right now. I'll remember in a moment. But Joy shared with us that repression feels like where they're from, in Connecticut, is they're in academia and feels like they're almost gaslit into believing things that aren't true. Where we talked about Huey Newton's definition of power, it's like they're defining the phenomena, and he knows that it's not right. The other brother that I cannot remember his name, remind me in the chat if you can. Um, he barely had any time to speak, but he was talking about in North Carolina, there are organizations doing great work. Phil, yeah, Phil, and they're not being lifted up. And there are things that are happening to Black institutions that aren't being shared accurately on the news and in community. I shared in Virginia that repression is on a continuum. You've been repressed since you were 0 years old, and now you think that the way that you're treated at work is normal to the point where you're ready to fight the brother right next to you, but you won't say no to your boss. And you keep your head so low that it's easier to get cut off. So I also shared that seeing what the United States is doing to Cuba makes me feel that repression is definitely something that has qualitative differences in different places, and the stuff that our so-called country is doing to them is definitely repression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hundreds of military bases, blockades, tariffs, all of this, right, is how the empire functions, not just as us being here, right? But what does this mean, right, for our brothers and sisters elsewhere, right? We'll take one more, Calvin.
Evening, family. How we doing?
What's good, my bro?
Um, so I was in a group with the brother Keto, and I was sharing with him that in Miami, one of the most glaring examples of oppression is in our housing. So housing disparity is a major issue here, as it is in many places around the country. And one of the things that you notice is the people who are building the buildings, of course, cannot afford to live in them. Not only can they not afford to live in them, they're kept at such low wages so that the companies don't have to pay them for health insurance. So not only can you not live in the building that you're building, but you might also die doing so. And these things are continuously, and of course they're not in the neighborhoods that they live in. So you're also spending money to leave your own community to go and build things that you can't afford to be a part of.
Thank you. Um, I know there's more that folks can share and say, but we're gonna keep it moving, stay on time. Um, so we're gonna move into a bit more of our presentation. So yeah, why does repression happen, right? And y'all mentioned, but we want to give again. We're gonna zoom out a bit. So you can go to the next slide. Yes. So repression, as I said before, it is always happening, right? Like I think if we assume that it only happens in particular moments, right, of heightened political, social, cultural moments, then we will be very wrong, right? We will be misunderstanding the idea of what progress is. It's not some liberal, linear, kind of this Western thinking of what progress is. Because again, what is progress to indigenous people of this country? What is progress to African people? What is progress to women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on about this, right? It is a class struggle. Repression is grounded in progress is grounded in a class struggle. And so um, we distinguishing between repression and oppression. Not today, but repression. Well, how about this? I'll use this definition, right? Here, right, is the use of force. Where it brings us actually, it's a good segue. It brings us back to this definition, right? The use of force or coercion by the ruling authority to suppress and highlighting clearly dissent, right? It's repression is not uh, repression is based on uh, the capitalist system feeling threatened, being threatened ideologically, right? Threatened, and so they respond ideologically, and when we are having mass protests, when we are in stages of dissent, it responds in vicious ways, right? So we'll have examples. What that looks like. Some of those examples, right? Most recently, right, is many of the trumped up charges for campus organizers, right, for the struggle for Palestine, right? The tools of repression. Oppression itself is always happening, but repression are these particular tools and tactics and strategies being utilized for the state to protect itself. Um, and so, um, yeah, so I'm gonna pause there. And essentially, right, it is again the response and the reaction to the capitalist system feeling under threat, losing possibly the popular voice, the public voice of what this country stands for, right? People having more anti-imperialist, anti-American stances or feelings or approaches in their artwork, in their organizing, demanding more human rights. It is in opposition, right, to the system itself, and so they use the tools of repression to do so. And with that, I'll pass it to my brother Maddie to take us through a deeper dive of this of not sorry this moment, but the theory of repression.
Yeah, thank you. I see a lot in the chat about repression versus oppression. So I think what Dio just said about repression being about the response, you can see on the screen here, this is just a depiction of like an immune system and a T cell attacking a threat to the immune system. So if you understand repression that way, that's what we're focusing on today. These are both constants. They operate differently. Oppression is always happening, of course, to people all over the world by the capitalist class. Repression, we are focusing on as a particular moment or set of moments in time as a response, right? And that's what repression is about. So we're going to focus on that today. It's not at the exclusion of oppression, but we're just focusing on repression today. And also the chat is great. So if y'all keep using that, that's a good place for us to have conversation too. Yeah, we're using this discussion about repression, though, to deepen our understanding of the state, and in particular, the capitalist state. This is an opportunity for us to understand what is actually the instrument of repression under capitalism, right? It's not just happening by random people. There's this apparatus, this structure of things, including government and other institutions that are doing the repression to us. That's where the force is coming from. And it's also where the ideological dimension is coming from too. So we're going to spend some time using repression to dive deeper into what the state is, what the state does, how we define it, how we can understand it. So it'll be a little bit theoretical, and it'll also be a little bit practical too, applying it to real life. Okay. So can somebody read the top left box? Come off of mute. I'm gonna trust y'all to be able to do that. And then two other people just raise your hands and you can get the last two boxes too. But can someone read this first one?
Helen, I can.
Okay.
A state is an association of people characterized by formal institutions of government, including laws, permanent territorial boundaries, and political independence.
Thank you. I see Dom.
A state has its own territory surrounded by borders and has the authority to enforce a system of rules over the people living inside it.
Thank you. Can we have one more person read the bottom one? Let's go with Eric. Or no, go ahead, Mackenzie. You came off mute first. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. A state is a political entity that regulates society and the population within its territory.
Okay. A slight self-critique is that this last piece is maybe going against what I'm about to say, which is that I want to make it very clear the state is not a person. The state is operated by people. It's an instrument in the hands of a particular class, right? And the class that we're talking about right now, because we live in a capitalist system in the United States, is the capitalist class. The capitalist class uses this thing that we're calling the state, this association of people with formal institutions of government, a set of boundaries that we call borders, right? And some level of political independence. All of these dimensions of the state are created by and maintained by the capitalist class, and the capitalist class uses the state for its own protection. All right. So I know people say the state this, the state that, and the state does this, the state does that. Technically, we just want to make it clear, right? Because this means that we can understand the state in different formations and used by different people, that it is a thing, an instrument that's being used by a particular class to achieve particular goals, right? To structure society in a particular way.
Sit down.
Okay, what's up, brother? Okay. All right, let's push forward. So we have these people here, a fresh looking Ruthless and Gilmore, some crustier looking dudes over here to the right. A note on the dudes. Asada Shakur, if y'all read the autobiography, she literally says Marx and Lenin that they're dudes. She said, yeah, they're dudes. So as in they're not gods, they're not deities. Marx in the middle here and Lenin to his right. But she also said that these are people whose contributions were too big to ignore. I know this is a whole conversation among many Black people. I don't know what the room is like here. I don't know the temperature of the room right now, but I will say we're looking at this theory to deepen our understanding of the state. And we, of course, apply it to our own conditions. We look at our conditions and we apply it in a way that helps us understand our particular station in the United States as African people. So we're going to look at a bit of theory to understand the state a little bit deeper. And again, we're doing this to continue to connect it to the idea of repression. So we're going to see how this understanding of the state helps us understand the dynamism of repression, and that it's not just one way. It can have multiple tentacles and multiple dimensions. Okay. So first, can somebody read this? Just raise your hand and come off mute. Benton, thank you. You're still muted, Benton. There we go.
The state is a product of social conflict, compromise, and cooperation. Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Craig Gilmore, restating the obvious. Abolition geography, essays toward liberation, 2022.
That's why Marx could say that capitalism is progressive.
Keep going, Benson. It's all good. Can you read this part at the bottom too?
The state can be struggled with, while capitalists currently use it to exploit and dispossess working people. It is not inherently good or bad, capitalist or anti-capitalist.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for reading that. Yeah, so we're just hammering home the point. This is a very dialectical or like multi-dimensional, flexible understanding of the state. That one is a product of human relationships, human relations. So what it does is determined by a struggle by classes of people. Most of us here, I would assume, are the working class or part of the working class in different dimensions or iterations. And then the people who control the state now are of the capitalist class, right? But that is not how the state has to be. That is just how it happens to be in this country. There are other countries where the capitalist class does not own the state or does not control the state, right? So examples might be Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, Venezuela, etc. So yeah, we just want to ground there first. This is how we can understand the state. Again, it's not a person. China, thank you, Troya. It's not a person. It is a tool, and it's a tool that can be struggled for and struggled over. Let's talk about Marx and Lenin briefly, right? We have these two little quotes here from both of them. I'll read these two, and we'll go to the next slide, and someone can read that. But Marx said in 1848 in the Communist Manifesto, the executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole capitalist class. So in other words, the state is managing the capitalist class. It's managing capitalism, the tool for managing how capitalism functions, right? And then we have Lenin over here saying something similar, which is that under capitalism, we have the state in the proper sense of the word. That is a special machine for the suppression of one class by another. So note, he is mentioning that it's capitalism that we're talking about, but he's also saying, right, that it's suppression of one class by another. This does not mean it has to be the capitalist class suppressing another class, right? It could be the other way around. It could be the working class suppressing the capitalist class, for instance, in a revolutionary context. So this is not a settled thing where it has to be one way. We just want to emphasize that. But we can understand that when repression is happening in our context, those who control the state are the ones who are engaging in the repression. They have the power of the state to do that. One thing that we want to note about the historical context for these two theorists is that for both of them, right, there was a little bit of determinism in how they understood the state and how they understood the workers' relationship to the state. So these two men understood that, or their belief was that, you know, with a certain level of repression, oppression, repression, exploitation, etc., there would be a growing consciousness politically in people who are receiving that repression, oppression, exploitation, dispossession, etc. And that with that consciousness would come a successful revolutionary movement, or at least that would sow the seeds of a potentially successful revolutionary movement. So there was just this expectation that would be the trajectory. And the next person we're going to talk about is strategically placed in the presentation to begin to complicate that and to give us some space to ask some more questions about what does it actually take to build a revolutionary consciousness and movement when we're in a time of repression, right? Is it so simple that repression then equates to higher consciousness in a revolutionary way? Does it just equate to a revolutionary movement? So I do want to ask before we even say anything about this guy, Antonio Gramsci, does anybody know who this is? What do we know about him? Take one or two people who want to share anything they know about this guy right here. Brother, is it Toussaint? Is it, oh, it's another brother in the background. Go ahead.
We got a team here, brother.
Hello, team.
Hello, how you guys doing? I was just doing a study last term about Antonio Gramsci. I believe he was locked up in Italy pretty much his whole life. He kind of died in prison. But he wrote these papers, you know, kind of like one of Africa's presidents who was writing in jail, but he wrote these papers and he published a lot of notes. But he witnessed a lot of revolutions during the time, but he was never freed and died in prison due to his sentence. I'm not sure that explained too much. Yeah, the prison notebooks.
You were absolutely
That's the
right.
one.
Yeah. Right.
Thank
And
you.
the president you were thinking of was Mandela.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. What's the brother's name?
Sammy.
Samuel.
From Miami.
Sammy from Miami. That's it. All right. Thank you. All right, let's rock with that. Let's take that and let's move forward with this theory a little bit, right? So that's absolutely right. A man was theorizing from prison. How did he get there? Right? He got there because he tried to engage in a revolutionary movement. He was an Italian communist. He was a leader in the Italian Communist Party. He was someone who was organizing workers in Turin, Italy, and was trying to take over factories, trying to occupy factories in a moment where there was a struggle for the state, right? We have an upsurge in fascism in Italy, and an attempt by Mussolini and the capitalists to control the Italian state and control the Italian nation. And this guy, Gramsci, and other communists in Italy are trying to organize for power in Italy, but they fail, right? There's an assumption that they have that is based on some of the theory we just talked about, that with a level of repression that they're seeing in the face of Mussolini, right, in the early 20th century in Italy, that this is going to create in workers who are being oppressed, repressed, etc., this higher level of revolutionary consciousness that's going to make the movement win. That's what's going to happen, right? That's the understanding. What actually happens is what Samuel from Miami just said, right? They lost. He gets locked up, and he's theorizing from prison for the rest of his life. And he's writing the prison notebooks. Interestingly enough, the person who brought the prison notebooks to the United States, or at least helped do that, is Pete Buttigieg's dad. Isn't that weird? His father helped bring those papers over here. You knew that, Dio?
Yeah, I didn't know that. That is odd.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Son. Yeah. So that happened, right? So point being, what do we learn from someone like Gramsci who had this assumption about how things were going to work in this revolutionary context? What do we learn, right? He's considering the role of the state in the movement, or in the defeat of the movement, excuse me. And here's his analysis. And let's just lay it out. Let's try to understand what we get from Gramsci. One, as capitalism advances, the capitalist class increasingly uses the state to win popular consent. So if you remember from Marx and from Lenin, right? Let's just go back for a second. There's some pretty visceral language here, right? About the control of the state, but also the suppression by one class by another. And this dude on the right led a successful revolutionary movement, pretty direct assault on the Tsar of Russia, right? And the same attempt was made by Gramsci and co, and it didn't work, right? And instead, it's defeated, and some of this analysis is coming out, right, from Gramsci. One, that there's a dimension that needs to be theorized further or thought about further, which is the consent-making dimension of repression, right? So it's not only this in-your-face physical force, but it's also the use of, the ideological, right, to win workers over to the side of the capitalists against their own interest, right? But it sort of confuses the idea that this is just going to be repression equals consciousness equals revolution, right? And that's what we're saying, right? But that's what Gramsci's saying. Capitalist crisis does not necessarily mean that working class people will build revolutionary politics and or join revolutionary movements. It's not a guarantee. That's a thing to be struggled for and organized for, right? That's why we organized in the first place. If it were so easy that our repression and our oppression created revolutionary consciousness and revolutionary movements, we wouldn't even need to organize. We would just wait for it to happen, turn around, and here comes the movement. We win. But that's not how life works, and that's certainly not how this beast of capitalism, the state, works.
Otherwise, we would have been one. We would have been organized.
We would not be here right now. I'll tell you that right now.
We wouldn't be talking about this on the call right now. This would have ended after our people were free from slavery.
You feel me? So instead, a key insight, and this is not like Gramsci is some god, but he is theorizing from defeat. So the particular power in him being self-critical and the movement being self-critical and saying, where did we go wrong? Right? And so we can understand then that the evolution of capital and the evolution of the state and the means of its repression are happening at the same time. They're influencing each other, right? I see some chat activity about Italy. So this is not a statement about fascism today in Italy, 100 years later. This is not to say that Italy, that fascism has been eradicated from existence in the world. That's certainly not true. That fascism is like the favorite word of the liberals these days, right? So it's clearly a thing that's happening right now. But in terms of this particular time period, what we see, what we can understand is that it's not so simple as repression leads to political consciousness. And in fact, repression can lead to the opposite. It can lead to political confusion, to ignorance, and to supporting things that are totally against your interests. All right. So why do we care about this? Because we need to understand that people like this are engaged in a fight against us, and they don't just use brute force, but they also use consent. And so it's a more dynamic process than, man, they are beating the shit out of us, the stuff out of us, excuse me, face to face, right? There's an entire ideological terrain that's being struggled over as well. And the enemy knows this and uses this. So we're going to dive into some examples in a second about this so that we can get a little bit clearer on how this has operated across history. And then to finish, we're going to split up into some groups and talk about particular iterations of repression today and map out how we see the force being used, how we see the consent being created, and what's the result of that? What does that look like? So we can get a bit deeper and try to complicate what we're told is just very straight, direct forms of repression. Okay.
Thank you, Maddie.
Yes, sir.
Always sharp. So our next, what we're gonna do for the next, I don't know, 5 to 6 minutes before we get into our small groups, right? We're gonna me and Maddie will share some historical examples of repression. And then in your groups, y'all will talk about contemporary and present examples of repression, right? Um, and so I'm gonna go a little further out. I'm gonna start in the 1940s and the 1950s with McCarthyism. Uh, if you're familiar with McCarthyism, uh, if you're familiar with McCarthyism, then you would know how visceral this kind of return to it exists today. Um, in many ways, it has always never fully left, but in this particular mode, McCarthyism refers to the practice of making unfounded accusations of subversion, treason, or disloyalty, especially related to communism, mostly related to communism, without proper evidence. And in some cases, evidence, right? But again, McCarthyism is takes place during the Cold War, the beginning of the Cold War, which is a few years after World War II. So we're talking the late 1940s and 1950s. The Cold War primarily is the Soviet Union and the Western power of the United States and all of their allies. Um, and so in the United States in particularly, it was named after the senator, right, Joseph McCarthy, who led the notorious anti-communist campaign. Yeah. And so with that, I want to add, right, that the intersection that is important to highlight as we talk about, and I'm a zero in on an example of Black artists, but it's important to highlight the intersections of the civil rights and the leftist politics. So even if you were, you know, a civil rights activist, or you were, right, any type of Black activist, but you may not have been a communist, you could have been a Black nationalist or whatever, you will still be lumped up into uh, under the boot or under the fear of what McCarthyism brings is that, it's un-American. They're trying to take over our rights. The communists are demons, etc. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna give an example of how this lays out across these four questions that we want y'all to sit with, right, as you talk about your contemporary pieces, right? So first, the first question, yeah, there we go. So the first question, right, what repression did we observe, right, during McCarthyism, right? Um, And so, the practice of again making unfounded accusations and this subversion during this time period for about a decade, right? And you had other senators, right, that were involved in this. You had other representatives, I should say, right? You had George Dondero. I want to quote him, and we're talking about art, so I want to quote him. He says, "Modern art is communistic because it is distorted and ugly, right? Going back to how they demonize it, because it does not glorify our beautiful country, our cheerful, smiling people, right? He is laying out the narrative, the vision, the view of what it means to be an American. It says, in our material progress, right? Again, here's this word progress. Art, which does not glorify our beautiful country in plain, simple terms that everyone can understand breeds dissatisfaction. So he's talking about, cubism or abstract art. Is therefore opposed to the government and therefore creates an opportunity for our enemies. Rarely was he debunked in Congress? Ever. And he was very clear, like murals was not okay. Art on government buildings were not okay if it was not very American, right? So the next question, and I'll move through this quickly. How was force being used, right? It was used it was used as witch hunts, revoked passports. Folks like Paul Robeson, that somebody mentioned in the chat, right? He's famous famous for many things, right? But famous in this regard to McCarthyism because he was supporter of the Russian Revolution and the Soviets, and he was a huge supporter of labor rights and workers' rights. He had a famous congressional uh, a committee hearing during this time, and so because of that, right, his passport was revoked. Same thing with Langston Hughes. Same thing with W. Du Bois, and then deportations also happened. So Claudia Jones was deported during this time period, right? Um, so those are some of the ways for Black artists. Keep going. So how was consent being created, right? Consent was being created by the use of, right, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, where they were putting people forward to state their argument, but building this committee itself, right, was a way for them to target folks and demonize them publicly, right? Also the use of Hollywood, right, the use of cultural production on the right, not necessarily just the right, but the liberals, right? All of that. And these are things that are still happening today, right? You can keep going. And so right? What was the result? Right. Many people lost their jobs. Many artists were blacklisted, right, or faced social problems, even without proof. Right. People were beat. Right. The black and red scare will continue on into contemporary times, and it's important to highlight. Last thing I say, right? Um, this was an attack against cultural workers, against actors, against artists, activists, labor unions, labor organizers, and so anybody at this time period, right, could get it essentially. And so, yeah, so I'll pause there and we can move to our second example.
Yes. Yeah, and we're gonna I'm not gonna go super deep here because we want to give y'all time to do the group work that we plan to do. And we're running a little bit behind, but not so behind.
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna say one thing. Why did McCarthyism actually come into play? Right.
Mhm.
Part of it was again, right, this deep dissatisfaction. I see somebody actually mentioning that, but this deep satisfaction with the what the kind of the aftermath of World War II, the aftermath of the US becoming a kind of this global becoming positioning itself as a global power off the heels of the Great Depression, right? So people and many artists, and not just artists, but we're talking about artists, were highly dissatisfied with this country, right? And being excited about a people's revolution. This is also a time period of multiple revolutions starting to happen across the world, and people seeing that the U.S. is on the wrong side of this history, right? And so this is again the tools of repression to win the hearts and minds and spirits of the American people by force and by consent. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. No, that's really useful, brother. And in the chat, I'm seeing a light conversation about someone said, Philip said, I was just thinking if the House On-American Activities Committee doesn't still exist, its actions are definitely grouped under another committee, right? And so I just want to bring us back for a second to this. We put historical in quotations basically to acknowledge that, right? That there's no way that stuff like this has just disappeared because people discovered it or people didn't like it. There's definitely a reorganization of these functions of the state by the capitalist class to continue to repress in particular ways. This is just one iteration, McCarthyism, as is the counterintelligence program. So briefly, I'll talk about the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. Same idea. And by the way, this format is how we're going to do the small group, or I guess large-ish group activities, where we just talk about like what repression do we observe. COINTELPRO until like roughly the 1950s to the 1970s, a program that was when Dio's asking for McCarthyism, why does that surface, right? For COINTELPRO, it's the same story, right? It's people being this is post, I guess this is middle of the Cold War. This is around the time that we have this massive rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States, like this is like the center of that time period. And you have in the United States a lot of movements that are cropping up that are anti-capitalist in nature, right? So we're talking about the Black radical organizing tradition, which is named here, but it wasn't just that organization or those organizations that were targeted by this program headed by the FBI. You know, we have the American Indian movement, the Puerto Rican independence movement, the Chicano movement for independence, student organizations, even the white left organizations too, Communist Party USA. So there's this legacy, this big legacy of repression that's happening across these dimensions because these people are getting organized and mounting serious attacks against the legitimacy and the effectiveness of capitalist hegemony in the United States, right? So repression that we observed by this particular program, which was a massive undercover program run by the FBI, we didn't observe a lot publicly, but it was a secret undercover operation intended to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of Black radical organizations. This is a direct quote from the COINTELPRO papers, which is the documents that a bunch of people uncovered when they were trying to burn some draft cards. They found the documents that told everybody that the COINTEL program existed. How was force being used? In particular, a lot of infiltration of organizations by government agents, disappearances of some people within the organizations being infiltrated and observed, literal murder of people in those organizations, spying on them, other forms of surveillance, right? Consent being created in terms of shaping the public opinion in a particular way. We have smear campaigns. There's the famous stuff about Martin Luther King and how they in the COINTELPRO papers talking about sexual proclivities and like how he was as a person, calling him a communist and other terrible, dirty names. That's a joke. Mass media propaganda, and in particular, blaming organizational failures on the organizations themselves and obscuring the role of these government agents and other forces in creating the issues within those organizations too, right? It's not to say that there were not issues in organizations, because for human beings, they were always in mess. But in particular, this mess is being in some ways created and accelerated by the literal FBI, right? And then finally, what was the result? The destruction of a lot of these organizations, like the Black Panthers, for instance, the imprisonment, forced removal, and murder of leaders. Forced removal would be someone like Marcus Garvey, who was deported for fraud, as it were, by the United States. The murder of leaders, right? You know, Malcolm X, for instance. And then the fear of continued on our end, and for generations afterwards, some fear across people who could be in movement, who are afraid of it because they know what can happen in terms of repression. And perhaps also, certainly also actually, this generational gap between the cadre of organizers that existed in that time period and us, right? And it's not like all of these people have disappeared off the face of the earth, but the connections are not as strong as they could be had the repression not happened. So this is what we see what happens when there is repression. This is what becomes possible, and these historical examples, we're giving them to everybody here to just make a case for understanding this in a deep way like this and not understanding it in a unidimensional way. We're sort of encouraged to understand it in a very straightforward, easy, uncomplicated way when actually there's a lot of details that we need to unearth, discuss, and understand so that we don't become the subjects of repression the same way again. All right. So we're at a point where we're going to switch to small groups. I actually have this, it's going to be groups of four, or excuse me, four groups. So Dio, if you're making the breakout rooms, it'll be four groups. Those groups will be sort of large, and that's okay. The idea is that we have four other iterations of this exact same type of table, but with another set of examples. So group one is going to be focusing on DEI attacks. Group two will be focusing on deportations and detainment. Group three will be focusing on reproductive rights. And group four will be focusing on protests. And so each of the groups will spend some time answering these questions. There will be a facilitator from our team on the national PE level in each of those groups to sort of move along with these questions. And there will be some level of conversation. We're just trying to fill in the blanks. We're trying to do a little bit of collective education about these things. This is not a deep research project. It's going to be like 15 minutes. So we're not expecting perfection, but we are trying to have a little bit of conversation about what we see, what our observations are, what our collective analysis is, so that we can deepen our knowledge of the current moment, right? Use historical examples and the current moment to shape how we want to be organizers in this particular moment in time.
So, yeah, let's actually go through and get some repeat backs. Each group get about, it's not a lot of time, Roberto, about 1 minute. Yeah, to share what they talked about, to educate the rest of us. So let's start with group three. So group three, you focused on reproductive rights. So someone from your group, maybe a moderator or someone, want to share back.
I can hop in here. Yeah, so we did reproductive rights. In my group, awesome set of folks in there, really sharp. So I'll just go through some of the things. What oppression do we observe? We talked about the exploitation of unpaid reproductive labor. So the expro the expropriation or the exploitation of the time and the work that most times sisters or the caregivers put in, and that not being counted as a valuable thing that caregivers give, healthcare in the absence of choice, the economic situation people are put in when it comes to oppression, and also just this ability that they make it harder for poor folks to even want to choose to have kids because it's so expensive and the world sucks, right? How is force being used? Women losing the ability to use their bodies and still being forced to rear children. Brent gave a really good example about a sister, I forgot somewhere, but who has effectively lost all, function, but she's being kept alive so that the baby, it's interesting. Ask Brent more about that. Crackdown on contraceptives and medical attention, that's the force that's being used. How is consent being created? The folks that co-sign the Black church in a way that it talks about abortion and women's rights to choose, the reinforcement of sort of the way that men should view women in the world, capitalist white supremacy, white supremacist patriarchy, and then what has been the result? The destruction of the right to choose all across the country, and then people buying into it. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, that took longer.
No, that's fine. It's a lot to say and unpack. So, to let folks know, we probably go over about 5 minutes. So just to close out. So how about group two? Your focus was on deportations and detainment. So somebody from your group If nobody pops in, maybe
We got two representatives ready to go. We got Sammy from Miami and we got Inez.
let's go.
Sammy from Miami, boy.
It's good to see y'all. Okay. All right. So, what repression do we observe? We mentioned the Mahmoud and Kali and Mahmoud Tal, and colonized groups arrested and kicked out, as well as the SA ambassador, South African ambassador kicked out. And also the Haitian lady that was killed in a facility. Now moving on, how's force being used? ICE arrests in different locations, ICE and deportations, revoking student visas, infiltrating protests, loss of free speech, disregard of selective application of laws in the local governments, and trying to hide the true history of African Americans. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how are they getting consent to do this? Well, Elon Musk's business is improving. He is using this as a way to make America great again. Elon Musk's business, refugee to white South African settlers. They're using whatever they can to build white supremacy, to strengthen white supremacy here in the States by using other struggles. False propaganda, hearing about Haitians eating cats, migrants are taking all your money. We can look what's going on in Chicago right now. And lastly, institutions cooperating with ICE, DHS, et cetera, and schools, workplace agencies, the state to help deport people. Lastly, what has been the result? Well, indiscriminate incarceration and arrest of colonized peoples, prison industrial complex profits around the world. We know about El Salvador, children avoiding school, folks are afraid to travel.
Awesome. Thank you, group two. I I have a comrade, excuse me, a student comrade. We are in the same cohort in our graduate program, and he was arrested last year, for like engaging in anti-Israel, pro-Palestine struggle on campus, and he is now suing the state. But he's been, his student visa has been revoked. So, it happens quite often at this point, and with folks that we are in relationship with, as you all know. Let's go with group. Let's go with group 4, and your focus is on protests.
Peace. I'll just say again, we had a small but active group. We had representation from Atlanta, Miami, St. Louis, and Milwaukee that was active, contributing to the conversation. And so if you want to uplift a point that I might obscure or not fully articulate, please jump in. But we said oppression we can observe in a different context. We also highlighted this point up against Israel, but particularly how the state in Missouri is creating conditions where if you engage in boycotts against Israel, then you can lose state contracts, right? In general, how we talk about how these contexts relate to the protest. When you talk about something like the Miami housing crisis or the housing crisis that hit coastal cities and urban cities everywhere, it's a broader sort of destabilization of communities, and it disrupts our ability to even engage in protest, because what we see is this kind of broader ethnic cleansing that's going on that we call gentrification. And what also was lifted up is this broader surveillance and wrath of militarized police, where the conditions we're seeing, you saw the 2020s and the kind of responses to direct protests. Most of these protests start off in very mild ways, but it is escalated by the actions of police and or vigilante forces. To that point, how is force being used? There's the mechanisms of the state through the criminal justice system that use sentencing and plea deals to put pressure on activists who are wanting to engage in various levels of activity. And from the simple level of being out at protests can get you doxxed, can get you kicked off of campus, as we've heard, can lose your job, right? All these kind of different tactics as well. The specific removal of contracts and deals we already spoke to, endorsement silence towards vigilante violence. We talked about the campus protests again, where they take a blind eye, or they take a kind of turn our back approach to protest, right, and to allow folks to get attacked with chemical irritants or fireworks as they were doing at UCLA, USC. And just generally this weaponization of the term anti-Semitism to create a air of silence and fear in how you protest or what you protest. How is consent being created? One example that was brought up is through the Black Misleadership class, but particularly in Atlanta, it was spoke to about the candidate race of Andre Dickens, who, when you are in the position of running a race, you articulate and you say one thing, and then when you put in the position of power, your whole tune switch up. And this is a consistent trend we've seen in this kind of moment. And another form of consent that is being created, the contradiction we exist in terms of nonprofits and the proliferation of nonprofits since as a way, and it's heightened in 2020, 2010. We saw big money coming into nonprofits, but this was a form of consent making as well. And then lastly, what has been the result? Neocolonial free speech. We didn't get too deep in this, but the one example of this idea of arresting civil liberties was what was happening with Chairman Omali Yeshitela and this idea that they are agents of a foreign body, which is in direct contradiction to how we see the support of the state of the Zionist entity called Israel.
Thank you, Brother Randolph. Hope y'all taking notes, man. This is all good stuff. And lastly, group one, Maddie could take us home.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we had a really good amount of sharing in here with this DEI attacks situation. For the oppression we observe, right? We have, in general, firings, erasure of history, censorship. I love this phrase, regression to savagery, right? Stripping of federal grants that are intended to aid Africans in different parts of the country. We got companies dropping policies before they're even told to. So those sort of things we're seeing. Force, right? A lot of this comes down to some of the same stuff, right? In terms of the firings. I think it's a good point that contracts that use particular language that are at risk of cancellation for using particular words like equity and diversity, for instance. The forced change of curricula to make it less radical and to essentially to silence radical voices. Even nonprofits being told you won't exist anymore, or being threatened with the idea that they won't exist anymore if they don't comply with certain federal regulations about DEI. Consent process happening. I love the invocation of the Black misleadership class, right? And Black capitalists essentially engaging in a lot of grift and saying, you know, like, we just gotta bootstraps it. We gotta sort this out and be very strong individualists, and that's how we're gonna survive this set of attacks. So it's not about any sort of collective response. It's totally about individualism, and that's being normalized more and more. And then someone mentioned also these law firms giving pro bono services to the government, basically to protect themselves, but that makes it look like there's a lot of legal support for what the government is doing, right? And then, you know, the result is what we're talking about, I think, across all three of these things. The belief in entrepreneurship as the response and the accurate response, this more normalized belief in colorblind society and neutrality and that being possible. Someone brought up the example of a white person successfully suing for reverse racism in the entertainment industry. So, you know, it's back. It's back. Reverse racism is back. It never left, but it's really back now. So stuff like that, you know. Yeah, that was group one.
Thank you. The DEI attacks are some of the most vicious ways, right, to prove that their nationalist ideology is the most American, is the most equal, right? It is their cover. It is The DEI attacks is the new language for the ideological struggle. It is also where the battle of ideas is being waged in a variety of ways, but very heavily. So thank y'all for that group work and that group sharing. This is what it's about. So next week we're going to be doing part 2, right, on repression. But again, next week we'll be focusing on what do we do, right? What do we do? What have we done? So if you've been here before, and if this is your first time, you see that we always take I use the quotes, right? Historical analysis, right? To be able to frame time and place, but to also know that time and place isn't just a past thing. It's not just a future thing. It's also a present. If you actually, I ain't gonna do no spoilers, but maybe I should. If you saw Sinners, there's a moment where they come those things. Some of y'all gonna be hating. I ain't gonna say no names, but anyway, we're gonna get into that. So be on the lookout for that. And then the week after that, on May 28th, we'll be having a mass call where we'll really solidify more concrete. What do we do? How do we resist and build during these heightened moments of repression? And then lastly, the National Black Radical Organizing Conference. We've been talking about this quite a bit, whether you heard us on Black Liberation Media or Black Liberation Media, or on a previous Theory Thursday or Mass Call, or wherever we've been, everywhere we've been, social media. This is an opportunity, right, to spend some time with revolutionary formations that are thinking about what do we do in this moment and beyond, right? And so if you enjoy collective strategy, collective learning, this is a place you want to be. This is a place to dig in that bag and to really to hear from some seasoned folks and some new folks around a range of strategies and analysis. So that's our time. I appreciate y'all. Peace to the nines, power to the nine, love to the nines. If you want to learn more about our work, sign the pledge, sign the values pledge. You can become a member. And obviously, make a donation. But if you want to learn more about our work, we are national. We also have local hubs in 8 different cities. You can learn a lot about this on our website. So hit us up. Slide in our DM if you have questions or anything else. You know how to reach us. Have a good evening, y'all. Peace to the nines.
Peace to the nine.
Peace, y'all.
Power to the nine. Love to the nine.
Love to the nine.
Peace. If you're willing to
Peace
fight
to the
for
nine.
it. Peace.
If you
Love,
will.
honor, and respect.
Peace after revolution.
Yes.